Good evening to members of the public who are viewing the live stream this evening or tuning into our meeting after through our website. I'd like to call to order our regular council meeting for Tuesday, October 13th to order at 6 p.m. I'm Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith, and joining me in the council chamber this evening are councillors Chad Rintoul and Scott Garnett. And we have our four colleagues joining us via Zoom. You'll be able to hear their audio but not see their video. And good evening to councillors Barbara Fallett, Sarah Duncan, Terry O'Keefe, and Peter Wainwright. Joining us here in the council chamber off camera are several staff. Good evening to our CEO, Mr. Humble, to our Director of Corporate Services, Mr. Hissick, to our Manager of Engineering, Mr. Demare, to our Manager of Parks and Works, Mr. Robinson, and to our Senior Manager of Long Range Planning, Mr. Newcomb, and to our Executive Assistant, Ms. Cully. I'd like to first respectfully acknowledge that we're holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the WSÁNEĆ Nation. And before we look to approve the agenda, we do have 4 changes to the agenda this evening. The first is under item 11. We will have a council report from Councillor O'Keefe. Under 12A, the Beacon Wharf Select Committee minutes. Those were actually approved at a previous meeting, so we will withdraw those from the agenda. Under 13G, we have a late item, which is a staff report with regards to grant application. And under 14D, we have a request from the Memorial Park Society for a letter of support regarding the Track 21 campaign. So with those changes, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval as amended.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to public participation, where members of the public can participate by written submission, and we do have 4 written submissions this evening, which Mr. Humble will read out in just a moment. Or individuals, members of the public, can sign up to speak to us through Zoom, and we have no requests to do that this evening. So I'll turn it to Mr. Humble to read the four letters that we have this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll start with the first. It's from Mr. Adrian Kershaw. Mr. Kershaw resides at Unit 1, 10466 Rest Haven Drive in Sydney. And his correspondence reads as follows. First, let me say that I was very much in favor of your approval of the Happy Buddha Cannabis Store, because it will mean that I do not have to travel into Victoria or Central Saanich for my supplies to help me sleep. However, I am very much against having any more such stores in Sydney. One is enough. We do not need to have a proliferation of these kinds of stores, especially because that would run wholeheartedly against the very wise recommended restrictions proposed by Island Health. Buffer zones from schools and a 300-meter to 600-meter separation between cannabis retailers. Please, I beg of you, make sure that the Happy Buddha store has the status of a legal but non-conforming store, and prevent the opening of any such other stores in the village.
Thank you, Mr. Kershaw.
The next piece of correspondence is from Hildegard Hori and Marguerite Toulet, and it reads as follows. Dear Mayor and Council, I strongly urge you to use your common sense and don't allow more cannabis stores on Beacon Avenue. This is not what we need in Sydney. Don't you even think about the negative effects on young people? I do hope you have better ideas to revive our beautiful, sleepy little Sydney than inviting future drug addicts. Why do you welcome potential crime in our peaceful town? Legalizing does not mean promoting a substance that can be dangerous, especially for young people. Don't you realize that cannabis is a doorway to hard drugs? Your first responsibility should be to protect your citizens from potential harm. Smoking tobacco finally was legally forbidden. Now non-smokers are supposed to inhale the smoke from cannabis on our streets, not to mention the odor from which many of us find very unpleasant. We wonder which is worse, smoking tobacco or smoking cannabis. Protecting the health of your residents should have priority in your decision. Please let others know our strong opinion during public participation.
Thank you, Ms. Hori and Ms. Toulet.
The next item of correspondence is from Margaret Westbrook from North Saanich, and it reads as follows. Dear Mayor and Council members, Town of Sydney, I understand that at least one, perhaps as many as 3 applications for cannabis store licenses are being proposed in downtown Sydney. This appears to have occurred as a result of the Happy Buddha shop being granted a license and having announced its opening within a few weeks' time. I also understand that a staff report will be deliberated at tonight's meeting, whereby it is recommended that the proposed license move forward in the approval process. As a resident of North Saanich who regularly shops in Sydney, I am disturbed at the possibility of a proliferation of cannabis shops around my shopping areas. I purchase groceries in all 3 grocery stores in Sydney. I patronize the pharmacies, do my banking, visit my doctor, patronize the restaurants, coffee shops, coffee houses and bookstores, and use the library. Before COVID, I was a regular attendee at the Scholl Centre and at the gym. Like 65% of Sydney residents, I fall into the category of senior. And due to the COVID pandemic, I am keenly aware of the protocols and restrictions that we will all be facing for the next several years. And having to navigate the streets around or near these shops, particularly during a pandemic, and where people will probably be actively smoking dope or otherwise using cannabis products, does not fit with the community profile of Sydney that I have grown to admire and respect. Is approving another, and perhaps even more, cannabis shops in the best interests of this town? I, for one, think not. Sydney has positioned itself as a pedestrian-friendly book town with a majority of seniors, with family-friendly streets and shops that promote this community-based concept. How do cannabis shops fit this profile? Are customers of these shops going to purchase their cannabis and then use the product on the adjacent streets? If so, bylaw officers will be kept busy, as smoking the product is not allowed on any street in Sydney. And what if the product is used and the person decides to drive back down to Victoria on the Pat Bay Highway? The RCMP will be kept busy as well, and there are few options other than driving to return to the Victoria area. I think it will set quite a disturbing trend if Council decides to move this cannabis application forward. Perhaps the Happy Buddha received a license. That should be the extent of cannabis shops in Sydney. To move the next application forward, and perhaps more, is a bad idea, and one that I hope will be strongly opposed by the Sydney taxpayers.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrook.
Finally, the last piece of correspondence for public participation is from Miss Gail Hazelhurst, who resides on Resthaven Drive in Sydney. It reads as follows. Hello, there seems to be a negative trend to turn Sydney into a recreational cannabis destination. Please do not allow several recreational cannabis stores in Sydney. I don't believe that is what Sydney wants to become and become known for, or experience the negative consequences of. I am shocked that most of Council and staff continue to mostly ignore Vancouver Island Health Authority's concerns and recommendations regarding recreational cannabis retail stores, as their concerns are for public health and not for monetary profit, and they should be the highest governing authority on this issue, and not the people who only want to profit monetarily from it. My husband Dale walks our dog down to Sydney Harbour and back every day, and he has already noticed increased marijuana cigarette smoking at our Beacon Park. Do we have some Sydney bylaws in place to prevent this? If so, who enforces them? I request that this letter be read aloud at the Council meeting tonight. And that concludes the written public participation correspondence, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for your submission, Ms. Hazelhurst, and thank you, Mr. Humble, for reading those this evening. I'll now bring public participation to a close. We do have the cannabis item on our agenda later this evening. And I'll turn to number 6, adoption of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes, those from our regular council meeting of September 28th and those from our special council meeting of October the 5th.
I'll move that both sets of minutes be adopted.
Second.
Any errors and omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We do have business arising from minutes, and this is for information only. At a special council in-camera meeting of October 5th, Council resolved to update its 2021 to 2022 strategic plan, and that is an item under 13F on our agenda later this evening. We have no petitions or delegations. I'll now turn to my mayor's report, and I have a few items to touch on briefly this evening. On the agenda, I indicated that I wanted to provide not only colleagues but members of the public a recent letter from the regional mayors to the provincial party leaders and all of the candidates on the South Island in this provincial election. The mayors conference, the 13 mayors in the region conference approximately every 2 weeks, and we discuss a wide range of issues that are of interest, shared interest among our municipalities. And quite frankly, it was a challenge to limit this to 3 issues, but we wanted to bring certain issues forward that we were in agreement were a priority, and 11 of the 13 mayors signed off on this letter to the party leaders and candidates. And the first was childcare. And what we've heard from our residents across the region is the concern from the public, particularly during the COVID pandemic, of the challenges of finding adequate childcare. With some of the limits of the pandemic protocols on childcare locations, but just in the resources that the province is able to allocate to this, and also for the education of people who work in childcare centres. And that was the first of the 3 that we rose. The second one was with regards to mental health addictions and treatment. And of course, we know it's in the news virtually every day about the issues of homelessness and challenges with housing and solutions that are going forward. And rather than continue to address that, which we do, we feel that strongly that greater supports for mental health addictions and treatment are necessary, not only in conjunction with bringing housing to the homeless, but just in dealing with those challenges that homeless people face. And it was strongly supported by all of the mayors. And the third was transportation. And council will know, and I think members of the public will know, that some 2 years ago, the province came to the Transportation Committee at the Capital Regional District, and I was sitting on the Transportation Committee at the time, and wanted to work with the CRD for the South Island region in bringing a long-range 10-year South Island transportation strategy for the region. It got delayed for a number of reasons, and was delayed additionally to be released through COVID. But upon that strategy being released after over 2 years, quite frankly, it was a disappointment to the mayors throughout the region, in that there was not more substance with regards to transportation initiatives in the region. We received updates from the consultant that the province hired on this strategy plan. We received updates periodically at CRD, and we were hopeful that that specific initiatives in many different areas would occur. Of particular interest to all of the municipalities in the region was Victoria Transit Commission and BC Transit's submission to the strategy for improving, studying and improving transit on the peninsula as a region, as a sub-region, in the core as a sub-region, and in the western communities as a sub-region. And there were very specific plans identified in the submissions to the province, and it's a disappointment that, quite frankly, apart from some additional bus lanes that were previously announced, there is nothing coming forward specific to addressing improved transit service. We can appreciate, as mayors throughout the region, and I'm sure other elected representatives can as well, that the pandemic has certainly affected the province in terms of their setting of priorities. But with the work that went into this, the aggregation of study after study that's been done in the past, and the study that was, the research that was done for this strategy, it was a disappointment that there is not more specifics in a long-range strategy. At CRD, I think in the 3rd week of October, we will be receiving a report from staff on the strategy, and CRD boards and committees will be able to try to reach out to the province to get more specifics on how we might might move this forward. But this is a very large issue, and I'm sure if for those that have been in touch with the media, this letter has helped generate discussion through various media about that South Island transportation strategy and ways to move forward. Next item I wanted to talk to, I did put in the agenda CRD updates, and I'm sorry, I got confused. We have a CRD board meeting tomorrow, so an update from CRD won't come until our next council meeting. But I want to provide an update in a couple of respects with regards to the South Island Prosperity Project. And there's three things I wanted to touch on. The first was that on September 30th, SIP held its annual general meeting. It was a virtual meeting, and it was very informative. At that meeting, the financials were released, and the independent third-party report on SIP's deliverables and strategy for the first 4 years of their operation was presented. And if that isn't on the website now, it will be available very shortly. And the second is with regards to the South Island, the Rising Economy Task Force that was initiated in April and involved some 120 stakeholders from around the region. And there was 10 committees that were struck. We had representatives from Sydney, our BIA Executive Director, our Chamber Executive Director, General Manager of one of the Sydney hotels, the CEO from the Airport Authority, and others on the peninsula were sitting on different committees. Those committees released their reports, and they've been available on the website for about a month now. I was asked to sit on an 8-member working group that met 3 times in September to help bring analysis, bring a working definition for a vision, priorities, setting goals and measures. There are some 160 initiatives and recommendations that came out of that are listed on the website. And that will be going to the full task force on October 20th. And then the Rising Economy Week will take place from November 16th to November 20th. It will be a virtual meeting. There will be several presentations. Any members of the public or elected representatives will be able to ask questions of the recommendations to committee participants, and then the strategy will be released. So following the AGM, following the third-party review of SIP's first 4 years, and following the Rising Economy Task Force strategy that will be released in November, SIP will be coming to council, I believe, in late November to make a presentation with regards to a request for the next 5 years of funding. So the 5th year for SIP, it was from April 1st until March 30th of next year, and they will come forward with a presentation at that time. So that's an update with regards to SIP. I would like to touch on just a couple of things for the community in general. Pleased to let the community know, and many know already, that our COVID Recovery Task Force made a recommendation to Council that we issue a special edition of Town Talk with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery and response and other information. And that issue has gone to the printer and should be out to members of the public. It goes to all residents and all businesses in the community in the coming week or so. Also pleased to do a shout out for our next town hall, our council town hall, members of council, and we have 4 guest speakers for the town hall. It's at 6 o'clock. It starts at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, and you can register. You can email admin@sydney.ca or call our main number to register to join the virtual town hall. Our guest speakers tomorrow night will be Morgan Shaw, Executive Director of the Downtown Business Association. She'll be talking a little bit about Halloween will happen in our community this year and some of the preparations for Christmas and other events. We'll have Constable Paul Middlestead from our local RCMP detachment, who will be talking about community policing, school liaison, and programs. We'll have a representative from the Scholl Centre talking about many of the good seniors programs that they've been running during the pandemic at the Scholl Centre. And we'll have Shauna Walker, Executive Director of the Shoreline Medical Society, the Shoreline Medical Center, who will be joining us and hopefully having an update with regards to how the flu shots will commence in our community in the coming weeks. So please join us for that town hall tomorrow evening, and we look forward to members of the public joining us. Lastly, I'd just like to touch on a really fun little opening myself and several colleagues from council did on Friday. We opened the new playground at Rathdown Park, and there had been, of course, a fence up around it for several weeks while the new equipment was constructed, and staff went out bright and early on Friday morning to take the fence down. And by the time we got there, about 9 o'clock in the morning, to do the ribbon cutting, as it were, there were already a 10 or a dozen kids on the equipment and enjoying it. And I have to tell you, it's among the most creative playground equipment that I've seen. It has a zip line, which I just know a number of adults are going to want to give a try, but it's just a little too short for adults. And a lot of creative playground equipment there. And I go by the area daily, and it's been busy every time I go by. So I just want to, on behalf of council, thank staff, Manager Brian Robertson, Manager of Parks, and your crew for the installation of that and working with the contractor. It's a great addition to our parks and came out of the Parks Master Plan that staff prepared and council approved earlier in our term. So we look forward to that lasting a long time and for staff to bring forward the next improvement to a park during our budget deliberations in the new year. That concludes my mayor's report. I'll now turn to Councillor O'Keefe, who would like to give one or two updates as council liaison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have 3 updates, one from the SBIA, one from the Shaw Center, and one from the Airport Noise Committee. So starting with SBIA, as the mayor mentioned, the SBIA has got some Halloween activities planned. Their Halloween Spooktacular, which will run from October 23rd to 31st. They're going to have spooky displays throughout downtown Sydney, a drive-in movie at the Mary Winspear Center. They've rented a great big huge screen, so that'll be running for a couple nights. Artsy is getting involved with some interactive features, exhibits at the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea. The museum is getting involved. There's going to be a community pumpkin patch sponsored by the Kiwanis Club of Sydney and Saanich Peninsula, contests, and a lot of other things. So details on times and places are on the SBIA's website. So it's nice to see a real community event, so many different community organizations coming together to support that. One other thing you probably have seen is that the SBIA has launched their Safe Sydney campaign. So that involved establishing an online pledge system to allow businesses to show their commitment to keeping Sydney a safe place community during COVID and following safe practices in their business. And once they complete that online pledge, they get a decal to display on their window to remind customers that their safety is of utmost importance. Coincidentally, at around the same time, the province of BC also, as part of their COVID recovery program, launched a similar program, their Restoring Confidence app. And that allows businesses to register online as well. They upload their COVID-19 safety plan, and in return, they get back a poster with a unique QR code for their business so that they can post that on their window, and potential customers can scan that with their phone and get details on the COVID safety plan for that business. That program will be marketed throughout BC, so it's something that everyone will come to recognize, and they're doing a lot of marketing for that as well. So I've passed that along to the SBIA and the Chamber in case they want to consider adding that tool to their arsenal of things to keep Sydney safe. And I guess just as an aside, I just mentioned to colleagues who were on the recovery task force, and maybe on the EAC. I think it's really important to be plugged into these other programs that are coming out of the province, the BC EDA, Destination BC, so that we can maximize the use of those tools and programs and avoid recreating the wheel, so to speak. Switching now to the Shaw Center. So like all businesses and attractions, their numbers are down significantly as a result of the pandemic. After a gradual reopening, there has been some improvement, but their numbers are still significantly down. Admissions, these were figures reported as of August. So admissions were 43% of similar numbers in 2019, membership sales at 58%, retail sales at 50%. It was notable that members made up 29% of total visitors for the month versus 18% last year. So they're seeing a lot more local members visiting. So it's nice to see that local support for them. On the positive note, in September, I got some late breaking news that their earned revenue and volume results finished at 60% of last year. So they, September doing a bit better. In terms of other revenue sources, they've taken advantage of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. There was an Animal Care Fund initiative that they were able to tap into. And they have also put a significant amount of time into trying to get more donations to help them out. And they were successful in getting 2 major donations at the end of last month that totaled $60,000 to help support their operations. So they're really happy to see that come in. And so that $60,000 tapping into those programs and the funding that provided by the town has allowed them to keep operating. So they think that they're good till the end of December. Of course, they're not sure what the new year will bring, but they're monitoring their cash flow closely and their business continuity plan, and really putting a lot more energy into increasing their donations. One thing of note is they had a catastrophic failure in their saltwater system several months ago, which meant that they had to shut down a number of tanks. They had to bring in an emergency system for over 24 hours during a busy, warm weekend. They had to do oil changes for 3 life support pumps. They had to drain some tanks. It was a really quite a catastrophic thing that they had to deal with. And because they hadn't dealt with anything like this before, there was no plan on what to do. The good news is that they figured it out. They fixed what had to be fixed, and they now have a 35-page step-by-step crisis management plan in the event of another emergency shutdown. So they put themselves in a good stead for future incidents. Coming events for them, as I mentioned, they're participating in the SBIA's Halloween events. So they'll be having what they're calling Halloween Under the Seal from October 21st to November 1st. So you should all dress up in costumes and visit them between those dates, and you will get a 10% discount on the price of a 1-day admission. So get your costumes out. Finally, the Airport Noise Committee. So due to COVID, air traffic was down significantly at the airport. In April, they were down by 98%. In August, things have picked up a bit, but they're still down 75% of what they were at this time last year. So you wouldn't expect that there would be very many noise complaints. However, surprisingly, although there was less commercial air traffic, there was an increase in traffic with smaller aircraft. So the number of noise complaints was roughly the same as last year, but it was just the nature of the complaints was different. And that was due to COVID. And The reason for that was that with COVID, they found more people were staying home, so there was more recreational flying going on. There's also an increase in people practicing at the flight school, so a lot of people getting out to do that. And pilots just doing what they can to keep the number of hours up that they require. So what happened was that because there's less commercial aircraft, the smaller aircraft, which are normally restricted to certain areas of the airspace, they were allowed to expand into airspace that they normally wouldn't be. And so what they had was complaints from residents in Sydney saying, how come there's so many aircraft buzzing around my house? I've never seen them before. What's going on? So it was a result of that, just people doing training circuits in areas that residents weren't hadn't seen before. The Victoria Flying Club wanted the community to know that they have very strict rules about flying after 10 p.m. They're very conscientious about not wanting to disturb residents. However, flight schools on the mainland, usually Boundary Bay, are not as concerned. And so you may often hear aircraft flying late at night for those pilots who have to get their nighttime flying hours in. And those are from the mainland. So they wanted to know that don't blame Victoria Flying Club. They're doing their best to limit things past 10 o'clock. They also wanted us to know that the importance of the flight school in preparing pilots for the future. So they said that within Canada, there will be a shortage of 7,300 commercial pilots by 2025. And even with the capacity of all training centers across the country, they'll only be able to turn out 4,000 new pilots. So there will be a shortage of over 3,000 pilots. In addition, they mentioned that a lot of older pilots are opting to retire early because they don't want to have to go through the extra training that's required for some of the new aircraft coming out. So I guess, their point was, yeah, maybe there's a few extra aircraft flying around once in a while, people doing training, but to please try and understand what they're trying to do to train pilots for the future. 443 Squadron wanted to let us know that they're getting one more Cyclone helicopter in a few weeks, and in 2021 they'll be getting some more. Their flying program involves 2 to 3 sorties a day, 2 hours long, to get their crews ready to deploy. There's usually only 2 night flights a week, but because they usually try to get those done by 10 o'clock as well. So that's it for me, for those 3 organizations. Things they wanted to pass along. Unless anyone has questions, that's it for me. Thank you.
Any questions of our colleague, Councillor O'Keefe? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 questions regarding the Shaw Centre. If you know the information, how have they? I was wondering how it impacted their staff levels, and with regards to the catastrophic event, were there any casualties?
So in terms of staff levels, yeah, it did impact them. They did have to lay off. They did have to go through a process to figure out who they had to keep on, who they could keep on board. Of course, focusing on those who had to look after the creatures, the caring and feeding of them. They were, like I said, able to tap into the wage subsidy to cover costs for a lot of that, but there were some layoffs. But I believe they're back up to a full cohort of staff now. In regards to their catastrophic failure, no, they didn't lose any, no animals. There was one creature that passed away. I think it was an eel, but that was due to unrelated, that was a health issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments, thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for those in-depth updates. We appreciate those updates. And I'll now turn to committee reports, and we'll start with 12B, which is I'll turn to Councillor Fallett for the who is Chair of Committee of the Whole on October 5th regarding the minutes and 2 recommendations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that the recommendation for the minutes of the Committee of the Whole from October 5th be received.
Second.
Discussion? Call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you.
And there were 2 recommendations that came out of that. The first recommendation was the cannabis retail store referrals, outstanding council resolutions. The recommendation, and I so move, that Council Resolution 2019.37.505 to amend Policy DB-015 be rescinded.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
And the second recommendation from committee is that Council Resolution 2019.37.504 to prohibit cannabis retail locations on Beacon Avenue be rescinded.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I hope my colleagues will indulge me one last time on this issue. I just think it's something that I think is really important, and I think we're at a critical juncture in how we decide on this that could have significant impact on the future of our downtown core. And, you know, I want to reiterate again, I'm not against recreational cannabis. I think it's a good thing to have a safe supply for people who want to use it. It takes a criminal element out of it. So I'm in totally support of all that. The main concern for me, again, is that health aspect and where these things get located. So, you know, in reflecting on the discussion we had last week at Committee of the Whole, it was suggested that it was too late to prohibit further cannabis stores on Beacon. I think the phrase used was the cow was already out of the barn. And the feeling that there was a lot of feedback in favor of the Happy Buddha cannabis store. And since it was approved, this was seen as an endorsement from the community that they were in favor of more cannabis stores on Beacon. But I don't believe that's the case. Although there was support for Happy Buddha, most of that, I believe, was because it was the first application that we had received. And people generally, what I heard was that they wanted to have access to a safe supply of cannabis in Sydney. And to me, it wasn't an endorsement that citizens wanted to see more of these sorts of stores on Beacon. When we went to gather the views of residents for the Happy Buddha application, what we asked them was specifically related to the Happy Buddha cannabis store. We didn't ask them, are you in favor of having more cannabis stores on Beacon? And I'm concerned that, you know, council may be making the assumption that because most of the responses that we got for Happy Buddha were positive, that therefore is an endorsement that the community supports more cannabis stores on Beacon. In fact, you know, we've already, well, as we saw tonight, I guess, correspondence from residents who were in favor of Happy Buddha, but they're not in favor of more stores. Now, one could argue that as further applications come forward, and if they are on Beacon, we will still have an opportunity to say no. So if we go out, we will be required to go out for public, solicit the views of the public again, and the public could come back and say, you know what, yeah, we were happy with one, but we're going to say no to this one. So we could go, you know, that might be how it played out. However, another concern expressed by council was about incurring more time and money, especially on legal fees for these sorts of things. And so my concern is that if we leave it open to Beacon, and if an application comes up, and if council decides to deny that application, that we're going to set us ourselves, we're going to be back in the same spot again, that we're going to be back in court over somebody else who says, why can't I have it on Beacon? You already allowed one on Beacon, so you should allow us as well. And we might, you know, they might be unsuccessful, but we will still have to be spending more staff time and lawyer time on this sort of thing. So for me, I think the only way to avoid that is to not open the door in the first place. And so this is my last pitch to, I think we should proceed with the resolution to disallow cannabis on Beacon for those reasons. But more importantly is that by moving forward with that resolution, we should be giving the residents the opportunity to voice whether or not they want to allow additional cannabis stores on Beacon. As I said before, just because they said yes to cannabis, Happy Buddha, doesn't mean that that wasn't a referendum to say yes, we're in favor of other stores on Beacon. So there you have it. That's it. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for your patience and your latitude with that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a few comments. First one is that Council is, I'm sure, aware that LCRB has forwarded 2 additional cannabis retail licenses to the town of Sydney. Neither of them are for locations on Beacon, so proceeding with this zoning amendment would have no effect on the 2 applications that are pending. Second thing is we should appreciate what making a business legally non-conforming is going to do to it. It's going to make their insurance more expensive because they're conducting a business that is not legal under the zoning bylaw. And they may be grandfathered, but they're still doing something that the zoning bylaw does not permit, and that influences insurance rates. It can also influence the relationship with your landlord. Hi, landlord, I'd like to renew my lease. And yes, it's a business that's not legal under the zoning, but please renew my lease anyway. So what you're doing is you're creating a situation where you're deliberately disadvantaging a business that you've literally just approved. And, you know, if we're concerned about attracting lawsuits, that actually sounds very much like formula for attracting one, particularly when you're doing it to a business that's just demonstrated their willingness to take us to court on things. So I don't think this makes very much sense. The other thing, I guess, to appreciate is that there is no proponent asking us for this zoning amendment. So if we want to initiate it, it's the town initiating it. And that means it's not just the staff time, but we're paying all the expenses for the advertising and the public hearing. So it looks to me like this is, if we're looking at going down this route, we're probably looking at attracting a lawsuit. We're probably having no effect at all on the 2 applications that are already pending for additional retail. And we're going to have to bear the cost of doing it. And do we really expect that the outcome of the hearing is going to be different than the decision we made just a couple of weeks ago? Well, I don't know. It could be different, but it's probably going to be expensive for us to go down that route to find out. So all things considered, no, I don't think this makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? So we do have the motion on the floor to rescind that motion. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn again to Councillor Fallett, who's our liaison to the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force regarding their minutes from the September 10th meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We met on September 10th, and as council can see, that there was quite a lot of discussion about different things going on in the community and looking for updates. Some of the things that came out of Sydney BIA, Councillor O'Keefe has already talked about. There's ways of looking of how we can normalize our life, and what we can do that we used to do, and how do we do it safely. We didn't bring any recommendations forward for council out of this meeting, but there was some discussion about looking exactly what the committee is doing for the future. So I will leave it to council if they have any questions, or Mr. Mayor, if you have any comments to add to mine.
Nothing to add at this time. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And perhaps Councillor O'Keefe, if you could elaborate, or if not, staff could elaborate, how the messaging will be shared with the community around the changes to Remembrance Day celebrations that are touched on here, and whether or not, Councillor Fallett, you can elaborate at all in terms of the intent for those celebrations.
I can elaborate on that, having been in touch with the organizers. So Mary Winspear will be the host of the Remembrance Day ceremony this year. They have successfully held events with a limit of 50 as per the provincial measures, and they've done it in a safe way. And so there will be a limit of 50 at the ceremony. There will not be a public wreath laying that day. There will be some wreath laying done privately, and Mary Winspear has also agreed to webcast the ceremony live to the community on that day. So thank you for the question, Councillor Rintoul. I know the community will be interested how that ceremony will commence this year. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question about the 50 people. So would I be correct to assume that there will be invitations set out, or there will be a process for people to sign up if they want to be one of those 50 people?
It will be by invitation only.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, as for those of us, and I'm sure all of us have attended Remembrance Day ceremonies, the participants in the ceremony is usually a number much greater than 50, apart from members of the public attending. So they're of course working with the Legion, who is a part of the ceremony, and they are doing making the decisions to include as many veterans as possible in the ceremony. Okay, so Councillor, if you could, Councillor Fallett, if you could make a motion to receive those minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to receive the minutes.
Second.
Great. Any further discussion? Thank you for the update. All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, our liaison to the Economic Advisory Committee in their meeting of September 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't speak at length to these minutes, except to remind council that we did move ahead this recommendation from the Economic Advisory Committee. Council had a discussion on it in advance of receiving the minutes, so that the guidance from the committee could be heard by council and forwarded to staff as a part of their consideration and the process staff are undertaking with regard to reaching out to local businesses and solicit feedback, looking towards providing some appropriate options to help businesses around winterizing outdoor spaces. So council have addressed that item and was referred back to staff previous meeting. So with that, I will move to receive the minutes from the committee.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, I'll call a Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. But this, one of the things I noticed was, concern about this thing about section 25 of the community charter that prohibits municipalities from supporting businesses. And I'm wondering if, are staff looking at what some other communities around the province are doing? I mean, there's similar sorts of initiatives, it seems, to support businesses in the communities by constructing outdoor patios and facilities. And so it seems that other local governments are finding a way to get around this, or to solve this issue. So I guess just it seems to me like there must be ways around it. So my comment is just, I hope that we can look for ways to overcome barriers rather than stopping things dead in our tracks as we try to support the business community.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Mr. Humble if he'd wish to comment, and I might provide a brief comment.
Yeah, certainly. I guess if the councillor is aware of what other municipalities are doing in terms of, circumventing Section 25, I mean, it's a very clear piece of legislation that's been around for a long, long time. So certainly staff don't want to put up any barriers, but we're obligated to follow the legislation, and the legislation is crystal clear. It's either assisting a business or you're not, and so staff are very aware of the legislation, and again, we'll provide as much input as we can when we reach out to the businesses to see what's feasible and what's not.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And again, this has been a topic actually from early on in the pandemic, when the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing was conferencing with mayors on the Vancouver Island region at the time on a regular basis, and Mr. Humble was joining those calls as well. That mayors expressed, the province to consider some flexibility or changing the legislation such that we might be able to provide assistance. But quite frankly, the province has looked at it and they've decided not to make changes as we understand it at this time. Just in discussing, the topic with my colleagues, I think Victoria is probably the biggest example of a community that has had some 100 businesses move forward with the municipality in terms of requesting additional patio roadside licenses, and to my understanding, there haven't been assistance provided to business, but they've been able to provide that program for many businesses in that area. So I appreciate the sentiments and that sort of thing. It has been raised before, but as Mr. Humble has indicated, staff are quite aware of the existing legislation, and it's tough to find ways to go around things when you're dealing with the community charter. So we do have the motion on the floor to receive those advisory committee meetings. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to staff reports, and we have several this evening. And I'll turn to item 13A, which is the award of tender for the 2020 street sweeper, and a report from staff dated September 18th. I might turn to Mr. Robinson, Manager of Parks and Works, to perhaps just give us a brief update. Street sweepers aren't the sexiest thing that happen in our communities, but it is an expensive piece of equipment, and it was valuable to the community, especially with the work it did downtown, and appreciate any update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly we had approved in our 2020 vehicle replacement reserve $300,000 for the purchase of this machine. We went out to tender, received 4 tenders. One of the criteria we did ask for was a very tight turning radius, less than 6 meters. It's one of the areas that provides us to allow for our pedestrian bump outs and areas like that where we've had some challenges in the past. There was only one submission that came in under budget, so we reached out to that. We had the mechanic staff and our operators demo the unit. They were extremely pleased with it. One of the other features is it's a single engine unit rather than a dual engine unit. So the operations of the cabin chassis and the Vactor and the sweeper unit happens under one engine. So you're realizing about a 40% fuel efficiency off that. We've gone with an option for a front-end articulating broom, which again provides us with a more robust cleaning, weed removal on curbs and gutters, things like that. And a leaf removal system as well that we think will be advantageous to us with a 360-degree swing. So annually, this unit puts in about 700 hours of time. The warranty is 2,000 hours or 2 years, so we were quite pleased with that. Cubex has operated a Canadian company out of the Lower Mainland. They have guaranteed us, they have $5 million worth of inventory on site in Vancouver. Shipping of any materials that we require is free, and they do offer a robust training program. The unit itself is manufactured in Europe, but it does use a North American power plant with a Cummins diesel engine, 4 horsepower, 4-cylinder, 138 horsepower.
Thank you for that update. Any questions for Mr. Robinson from council? Sorry, I'm looking at small screens. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. If I may, Mr. Mayor, through you to staff, just a quick question. On the photograph, it looks like it's a much smaller unit, and is that so? And also, is the noise output of this unit less than the other unit that we currently have?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Fallett, I believe, just looking at the specs here, the noise emission is 79 decibels at 50 feet. I don't have offhand our unit at hand, but certainly with the 2 engines and the need for the higher RPMs to operate the Vactor systems, I would suggest that it is a quieter unit. The other issue with this unit is with a very tight turning radius, it's probably going to decrease our need to back up and sound that beeper, probably by about 60%. So we'll be able to turn on Beacon Avenue very easily without moving out into other areas where we might need to be a requirement to back up.
Okay, thank you very much. It looks a much smaller and less imposing unit, and I think given the size of our community, it's probably it appears to be not as high and also much shorter, and I know that might be really a non-issue for some people, but I think it does make a difference of the size of unit in our community. So if I'm correct with that assumption, thank you very much. I hope I am correct.
Certainly when the mechanic staff looked at the machine, took the covers off, looked at the layout of the maintenance, these are one of the few pieces of equipment that do have a lot of wearable parts, hose nozzles, sweeping brooms, things like that. I believe there is a bank of 13 grease points, which are very easy to get at. Ergonomically, it was a very desirable unit for the mechanics, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions or comments? I just want to thank staff, Mr. Robinson and staff, for the in-depth analysis that was, and the climate lens that was put on this purchase as well. Again, an expensive piece of equipment. It's one of the services that residents and businesses kind of take for granted and just expect to happen. And 700 hours of service for this piece of equipment is important for the maintenance of our downtown, and we appreciate all the advantages with this new piece of equipment. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we do have a recommendation with regards to the tender.
I'll move that contract number 2020-014 for the supply of one 2020 model Ravo 5 street sweeper be awarded to Cubex Limited at a total tendered price of $279,600, including all applicable taxes, shipping and handling costs, duties, charges, and assessments.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Now turn to staff with regards to item 13B, the sidewalk cafe request from Quince Cafe, and the report from staff dated October 7th. Did you wish to introduce staff or? Sure.
So this Quince Cafe on Beacon Avenue has a current roadside cafe license. They have approached the town to effectively swap the pedestrian or the roadside cafe license onto the sidewalk, and then modify the street section that's currently where their license is for their roadside cafe into the pedestrian walking space, with the intent of trying to get the patrons closer to the building and offering a little bit more protection for the patrons. So by doing that, there would have to be some modification to that pedestrian walkway that's currently shifting it out onto the street to make it safe. The section that was done in front of the City Bakery, there was a plywood surface put in there to avoid the difference in elevation between the curb and the roadway. So we'd be looking at doing something similar would have to be done to make that walkway at level with the sidewalk surface.
Thank you. Before we go to resolution, are there any questions of staff? I just have one. Have they indicated I understand the swap that they want to do, but how much sidewalk space they are requesting?
They're looking at probably the majority of the width of the sidewalk. Under our bylaws that cover the sidewalk and roadside cafe licensing, they are required to provide and ensure we have a 3-meter walking corridor. So the sidewalk width is approximately 3.6 meters in that location, and the parking bays about 2.5, actually probably a little bit less with the barricades there. So it would be a bit of a split. I would assume that they'd want to get to maximize their space for their seating as part of the sidewalk licensing.
Okay. Thank you for the update. We do have a recommendation.
Move the recommendation that staff be authorized to convert Quince Cafe's roadside cafe space into a pedestrian walkway if Quince Cafe agrees to bear the cost.
Second.
Discussion, I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe first. Councillor Garnett, and then I would like to speak.
Yeah, I just had a question. So I'm wondering, what happens in the event that, so the owners of Quince Cafe leave that cafe, are they responsible then for dismantling that? Is that part of the agreement? I'm just wondering how that would all work.
Typically for an application like this, we would consider taking a damage deposit or a deposit for future removal of anything that would have formed part of that license. So that would be one avenue that the town could consider.
And just a follow-up, if I may. So would the town then do the work and they would reimburse the town, or would it be Quince Cafe responsible for hiring a contractor to do that work?
It would probably make the most sense for the town to install the work similar to what was done in front of the Sydney Bakery. We know how we've installed that and what works in terms of what the drainage is there. The owner would have the opportunity, if they felt they could do it with their own forces. But it would have to be something that we'd want to see be engineered if they were doing something like that for public use.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I recall, this was something that was noticed as a pinch point by staff, and that's why we proceeded for safety reasons. And I was kind of wondering when I was reading this if really that shouldn't have been the case the whole time, and that whole area should have been like that. And I'm wondering from a perspective of not assistance from a governing body, but just if we were to do it as a safety measure ourselves, and then does that still include it as being an assistance to a business? And so I'm struggling over that particular aspect of it.
We struggled with this, through the mayor to Councillor Garnett. Yeah, we struggled with this one too, and we sort of, from a staff perspective, certainly get where you're going in terms of is this more of a safety issue than anything else. I guess the biggest challenge that we have in assessing something like this is the request in terms of the actual patio expansion component. Are they going beyond, for example, what was there previously? And again, it's that fine line of if they are going beyond, does it constitute assistance to a business? If it was not the patio, but we're just dealing with a pinch point and ensuring two-way pedestrian travel, I think certainly one could make that argument, Councillor Garnett. But it's a challenge when you're looking at an expansion to, I guess, an existing sort of seating area, which is directly attributable to their business, and that's the challenge that we're sort of grappling with. Fundamentally, it's ultimately going to be I guess more or less a challenge around will this constitute a precedent potentially in other areas, and in terms of pinch points, could we see this happening elsewhere, and how do we respond if a similar request is made? So that's that's the challenge that we're facing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I would like to speak, and I would like to, earlier today I forwarded 2 photographs to Council and colleagues and staff, and I'd like to refer to those, although we probably have a picture in our mind from frequenting the block, that block south of or east of 2nd Street. So we do have the cafe on the corner of 2nd and Beacon Avenue, and then we have Sydney Bakery, and at the start of the pandemic, what we realized is that there was a fairly narrow sidewalk there, or a sidewalk that is more narrow than other sidewalks in much of the downtown, and that because Sydney Bakery was limiting the number of patrons in the store at a time, lineups were forming on the outside of the store. Sydney Bakery does have a small amount of space on private property that people can stand, but people were also standing on the public sidewalk, and we decided from a safety standpoint that was creating a pinch point, and Council resolved for staff to go ahead and use the parking spaces in front of Sydney Bakery for additional pedestrian walking space. There are 2 businesses adjacent to Sydney Bakery. There is West Style by Sydney Casuals. They similarly have a very small amount of a private space in front of their doorway. They would often put racks of clothing out in that space on private property. But the sidewalk is as narrow there as it is in front of Sydney Bakery, and staff determined that given that it was a narrow sidewalk, that they would also convert the parking space in front of that business into the pedestrian walking area. The business adjacent to that is Canada Post. They have a mailbox on private property outside of their door, which is a use outside the business. Excuse me. And again, town determined that was equally a pinch point and included taking a 3rd parking space there for pedestrian walkway. So the situation was different. So then there's Quince is the next business to the east, and Quince prior to the pandemic have a bench, which is still there, that runs on the outside wall on private property, and they also had 2 tables and 4 chairs, mostly, if not all, on private space, which allowed them to have, in effect, a small patio space on the outside of their business. However, they had made a request for a roadside cafe, and we had passed resolutions to allow staff to work with them, and that was implemented, as we know that it's been operating for a number of months that way today. However, again, if we go back to before we built the roadside cafe, it was a situation where Quince had outdoor space that they were using on private space, and they also had lineups because Quince does not allow any patrons to sit inside the store given their COVID protocols. So I have been a patron, and I witness other patrons lining up on the sidewalk, much the same as they do in front of Sydney Bakery, to enter the premises to make their purchase. And so for me, the situation in front of Quince is pretty much the same as it is in front of Sydney Bakery. And so if I was to do it again, I would suggest that we actually make the 2 parking spaces in front of Quince a walking space, as we did in front of the other 3 parking spaces for public safety reasons to do with COVID, and that be done at town expense. Then you're left with a situation where Quince is back to having its bench and its 2 tables for use as patio that it did before. Now, I can sense, and that was hence my question to staff, what was the area of sidewalk that Quince is requesting, excuse me again, that Quince is requesting in front of their store, and we understand it's a greater area of sidewalk. I would certainly leave it to staff to determine how much additional sidewalk space is reasonable given the distances that they want to maintain for safety. I think it was 3 meters was spoken to. However, I think if we had gone, and Councillor Garnett, you spoke to it prior to myself, if we'd considered as a pedestrian safety from the beginning, then we might have approached it that way with walking space from the beginning as paid for by the town, and then granted as was reasonable to maintain space on the sidewalk for Quince. So just because Quince pays for, if we were to go with this staff recommendation, if Quince was to pay for the cost of the pedestrian walkway, that doesn't grant them automatically more space on the sidewalk, because it's going to be what the safe distances are for pedestrians on the sidewalk. And so I would ask colleagues to reconsider it and not consider it assistance to business, but as Councillor Garnett may have been alluding to, is that to look at it as a pedestrian safety, and then grant Quince's request to the extent we can for additional patio space, which is just a simple licensing procedure, as a couple of other cafes have done in our downtown area. I'll turn to any future speakers. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe and then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'll just say I think what you're proposing is sounds like a good idea. I think this is the sort of thing that is in my mind in terms of how can we find legal solutions that serve the business community and respects the rules of the community charter. So I would be in favor of looking at this as a safety issue, as you state. I would support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report does clearly speak to this as being a potential pinch point, and has been classified as such. I'd gone into this with certainly with some reservation around the cost being borne by a small business. I felt that it's likely, and I could clarify this through staff, that the parking barriers that are in place, currently in other locations that we've seen would remain at this location, and that the sidewalk space would be built out, sort of a plywood platform similar to Sydney Bakery, and that my assumption coming to this was that there wouldn't be a cost for those parking barriers to remain under this new proposal. Does that sound accurate to staff?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, that's correct. Yeah, the concrete barriers would remain as a barrier between the traffic and the pedestrian flow. There'd be one barrier that's currently in place that just divides the walking space in front of the Sydney Bakery, and the Quince current roadside cafe would have to be removed. Small adjustments to the concrete barriers.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I see the cost then to the business around sort of that extension of the platform area. And it is clearly something the town has addressed elsewhere. And so I would be happy to amend the motion, or I somehow doubt that it would be considered a friendly amendment at this stage, but I'll yield to your guidance on that, Mr. Mayor.
I think when you're changing a motion substantially, and in this case, if you're changing it from considered assistance to business to not assistance to business, that it's changing the motion. And I would suggest the motion, if there's a council wishes to test it, to rescind the motion and try a new motion, or defeat this motion and go to a subsequent motion. I'll turn to Mr. Humble, and then I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out as well, staff had a bit of a discussion about this today, and one thought was that we would be taking, again, given the associated challenges with respect to this particular request, and again, the understanding that it does create some issues around safety in terms of the pinch point aspect, that as part of our overall assessment of opportunities for creating additional outdoor winterizing, outdoor space, etc. As part of that process, staff would like to take a more wholesome sort of broader assessment of other areas that might again be similar to this, and be able to report back to council on those specific areas, and what the potential opportunities might be to address those specific safety areas. So again, I'm just putting it forward to council for consideration, whether or not they may want to consider deferring maybe a decision on this until such time as we bring that overall assessment forward. It's just a thought for council's consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright. And
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the simplest thing, if the mover and seconder agree, would be to withdraw the motion and put forward a new motion instead. I don't see the need for us to vote this particular one down. I do support proceeding with a motion to approve this change without requesting that Quince bear the cost. And I don't think we should defer the decision until staff have given us a fuller report. I think that we should get on with it, because it's time sensitive. It's a safety matter. I don't think we should put it off.
thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to also echo that. I don't know that I'm in favor of deferring this. I do appreciate, I think it's a good idea that staff are looking at other locations as well, and it would be good to have a sort of look at this holistically, but I concur that if we're saying that it's a safety issue, I think we should deal with it now, and have concerns about deferring until a broader review is complete would, I don't think would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Withdraw the motion.
Good. And the seconder agrees to withdraw, so we don't have a motion on the floor.
Thank you. I may be missing an aspect of this, so I might work with staff here to help craft this motion. It's unclear to me whether or not the issue of using the town sidewalk space for roadside cafe need to be addressed within this motion. However, I'll intend to move that staff be authorized to convert Quince Cafe's roadside cafe space into a pedestrian sidewalk. And if necessary, authorize that the town sidewalk space be authorized for use as a roadside cafe.
Sure. Well, for additional patio space.
Correct, for additional patio space.
So I might just, through staff, or through myself to staff, ask, is it necessary to have the second part, given that council has already given direction on sidewalk patios?
We don't believe so, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I would go with the first part of the motion, if you could repeat.
Sure, that staff be authorized to convert Quince Cafe's roadside cafe space into a pedestrian walkway.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? We have none opposed. That motion carries. Thank you, staff, for bringing that forward. I do have a question arising with regards to the temporary pedestrian sidewalk that is in those 3 parking spaces and now will be converted for an additional 2 parking spaces to encompass all 5 parking spaces in that block. Is there some winterizing of that wood structure that needs to occur for the season rapidly approaching?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think it would be prudent for us to put some sort of a non-slip surface on there. Might be a little bit difficult with the wood that's been down there for a while, but we'll give it our best shot. And certainly we'll treat any of the plywood surface prior to the installation for the new sidewalk. So we'll do that in the paint shop and have a non-slip surface on there before we fit it into place.
Okay, thank you. I have a second question arising with regards to the patio space motions that council passed to provide staff with the latitude to do that during the pandemic, which was provided by the province. Those are set to expire. I know it was 6 months, I believe, from when we passed those, and I understand is that now at the end of December? A question through to staff.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I believe it is the end of December, and we do have a report forthcoming that will speak to that as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, we'll turn to item 13C, which is the new cannabis retail store license referral, a report from staff dated October the 6th. Mr. Newcomb, would you like to introduce briefly, or we could just open it to questions from council? I'll leave it to any questions from council before we go to motion. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to staff, thank you for the report. I don't know that I recollect this particular aspect that the province has identified, meaning the LCRB, with respect to the letter that they provided to the town dated September 24th, last paragraph on the first page, and that paragraph reads, "The LCRB will initiate an applicant suitability assessment regarding this CRS application, also known as a fit and proper assessment of the applicant and persons associated with the applicant. Once the assessment is complete, you'll be notified of the LCRB's determination. You may choose to withhold your recommendation until the LCRB has made a final decision regarding the applicant's suitability." And so my question to staff is what's the timeline based on your recent experience that the town can expect to have that information back from the LCRB as part of this process?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. The LCRB has their own process and how they deal with these applications. They don't provide a lot of information on their process to us. Staff have never asked the LCRB what exactly that timeline is for a fit and proper assessment. My understanding is it's essentially a background check of the applicant. But again, the LCRB has never volunteered any information on how long it takes or what the process entails to staff.
Thank you for the answer. It does lead me to believe that there's probably some value in sort of the last sentence that they provide us, and that is that we could choose to withhold a recommendation until the LCRB has made a final decision regarding the applicant's suitability. And I think that probably that's probably part of the process that's quite important, and I would be willing to make a somewhat revised motion if that resonates with others. But I'll leave my comments there for now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the staff report indicates that the proponent, GEMA Retail Corp, hasn't submitted a complete application in terms of what we need to or what staff needs to be able to evaluate whether it's conforming to our policy or not. So I think advising them that we're not going to consider their the referral until they've completed an application is a reasonable course of action. Don't know how long that's going to take. It may be that LCRB completes their that screening process before the applicant gets their complete application in. If not, when they do get their complete application in, it would be quite reasonable to wait until we, hear what LCRB's decision is about. But I think one of the more significant things that isn't discussed in the staff report, and it's alluded to in the correspondence that came up in public participation. So we've got yet another cannabis retail application that the letter has been forwarded by LCRB to the town of Sydney. This third one is from Buds Cannabis, which is currently operating a retail location in Central Saanich, and the proponents are Sydney residents. The challenge that here is that to apply for a license, the applicant has to make a significant investment. They have to secure a property. Typically, that's involved signing a lease on the space. So they've all invested quite a bit in putting the application forward. And of course, there's no guarantee. They're a business. There's no guarantee whether they're going to have their license approved or not. But I guess what we're looking at is it doesn't seem reasonable that that the market is large enough in Sydney to support 3 retail stores. So we could potentially decide to address that, or we could simply leave it for the market to determine that sort of thing. And we have, council in the past has had the question come up of should we allow yet another grocery store in Sydney? And there's the question of how many coffee shops is reasonable to have on one block? And the question has come up about other types of stores too. And council has not, in the past, ever made a decision that we're going to limit the number of retail outlets of a particular type in the town. We've simply let the market determine what happens. Obviously, it's going to be a challenge for 3 businesses all in the same retail sector to start up at the same time during the pandemic. And, the first couple of years are always tough. And if the market isn't big enough to support 3, it'll be lean times until one of them decides that they can't have a go of it. That's what the market does. And in fact, it may be that one of the 3 decides they're not going to proceed with it simply because they recognize the competition. I am inclined to let the market sort it out and not to try to make a decision of how many cannabis retail outlets are reasonable, and if we decided that it would be less than the number that are currently in front of us, which should be allowed to proceed and which shouldn't. We don't have any policy guidance. We really have not looked at this at all. I do think we would be best just letting the market determine how many cannabis stores and which should survive in Sydney.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess what I'm puzzled about is why it doesn't seem right to me that we would consider an application for a store when there hasn't been a fit and proper assessment conducted by the LCRB. So I guess my preference is to go back to the LCRB or the applicant and say, you know what, once you get your fit and proper assessment, and if that looks all good, then we would consider your application. So, I mean, yes, it's a lengthy process, but that's the way it is. And, you know, maybe they will pass that assessment. I don't know, but it sort of seems inappropriate for us to make decisions on whether we'll accept an application until LCRB has completely checked them out. So that's my preference on that. In regards to comments made about, you know, whether we should have discussion about limiting the number of stores, yeah, so it's true that we haven't made decisions about the number of coffee shops or bookstores or other retail outlets. But I have to remind council again that cannabis stores are different and they are not like any other business. And Island Health and the province and the federal government have all recognized that. And in terms of that, we don't have any policy to guide us on this. Well, we do. We have Island Health guidelines that talk about the density of cannabis stores in the town. So they've got buffer zones. So there is guidance there. I'm not in favor of just throwing caution to the wind and letting the marketplace sort it out. I think, yeah, I guess we could do that. Maybe it would be the case that there wouldn't be more than one set up, but who would have thought that we would have so many thrift stores or so many coffee shops or so many bookstores? So I guess I'm not as comfortable as just letting the marketplace decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure why we're having a discussion about the merits of the application. It doesn't seem like that's something that's actually even before us right now. It seems that we're supposed to be discussing whether or not we will communicate to the applicant that we'll consider it if they give us a full application, or whether we intend to bother looking at the application and not giving any recommendations to the LCRB at all. So until we actually have an application for them, I don't know why we need to discuss that the staff haven't gone over, they haven't gone over, you know, the distances to other potential stores. We know that there may be another one that comes forward, but until we have that, it all seems like a moot point that's kind of designed to get something back into the media again with another misleading headline about staff saying that that council is going to approve another liquor or another cannabis store on Beacon, despite the fact that's not what was under discussion at all. So I feel like we should just discuss these things based on what the question before us is and stop getting into the moralizing about it, because we already have 3 liquor stores in our town. And recently we just approved the Mary Winspear to have more liquor licenses, and nobody cared. Nobody cares about any applications for liquor on the patio. We have no discussions about this. Let's actually start just discussing these as though they're regular business applications that were being held to the same standard as any other application that would come forward under an existing policy in this town. So from my perspective, I think that we can go ahead and tell the applicant that when they come forward with an application, a full application, the way any other business would, that upon receipt of a full application, we can consider them. And we know that there's another business that is already starting to go through this, and we will consider them at the same time, hopefully, or at least under the same criteria. But I mean, until then, I'm not sure why we're discussing it. And with regards to things about the fit and proper assessment, maybe this is a question through to staff, but it seems like even if we said we're okay with this going through and the LCRB said, oh, it turns out that they're actually criminals who can't run a store, this seems like that would shut them down. There's no way that we can approve a store that the LCRB is going to say they can't run. and then it's going to happen. So I don't know why we need that decision either. The LCRB will either tell them we either say, yes, you can run, and then the LCRB says, yes, you can run, or we say, yes, you can run, the LCRB says no, and then they don't. We don't need to know that. The LCRB will stop them. Is this a correct understanding, perhaps through to staff?
I'm looking to staff, Mr. Humble or Mr. Newcomb.
I can speak to that. I think that is a correct understanding. Just to speak to some of Councillor Duncan's point, I would, from a staff perspective, I think we do also agree that we're not at a point right now, quite frankly, where we're making a final decision or a final recommendation on this particular application. We're just simply at a point where we're determining we've got the options in front of us. Do we want to make a recommendation to the LCRB, or B, do we want to consider the LCRB's referral and get the applicant to proceed with making a full submission? The LCRB's letter, when I read that third last paragraph, indicates that we could choose to, you may choose to withhold your recommendation until the LCRB has made a final decision regarding the applicant's suitability. Well, we're not at a point where we're making a recommendation. All we're at a point as determining, are we proceeding with this application, or are we not? So I would fully anticipate if council decides to proceed with option 2, which is to communicate to the applicant that we're going to consider the LCRB's referral. I think at that point, the LCRB will initiate their fit and proper assessment, and they'll undertake that, and we could seek to get a copy of that fit and proper assessment prior to making a final recommendation, our council making a final recommendation on the application.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Is it a follow-up question, Councillor O'Keefe, or I'd like to go to the next speaker? You're muted, Councillor O'Keefe, sorry.
No, it's just trying to understand what Mr. Humble is saying in regards to the process. Like, I'm trying to understand, is this different than how, like, I don't remember having this discussion when we dealt with the Happy Buddha application. So is this different? Because I don't remember doing this. So has the process changed, or are we doing things differently than we did with the first one? Like, as to, did we, with the Happy Buddha application, did we get a fit and proper assessment first, or did we also agree to, option 2 there, that we would consider it once we got a full application?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, we did receive the same letter from the LCRB with Happy Buddha. I think at that time, staff lacked a complete understanding of the LCRB's process. The LCRB at that time as well wasn't able to provide us clear information on how their own process worked. That may have been because it was a new process for everybody. We did the best we could in that circumstance. The issue of fit and proper never came up in that application, as you correctly recall. To this point, I can't say if that's been completed by the LCRB. I would assume it has, but I don't know that for sure. Since staff forwarded on council's resolution with regard to recommending approval for the Happy Buddha application, we've received no response from the LCRB except to acknowledge that they had received it. So we don't know the status of their application at this point either. The LCRB is not especially forthcoming with their information regarding applications.
Can I follow up to that? So are you saying that, So we've approved the Happy Buddha application, but we don't know whether they actually passed their fit and proper assessment.
Again, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, the town does not approve cannabis retail license store applications. We recommend approval
Right.
or
Yeah.
recommend denial. So the town recommended approval. We haven't heard anything, as I said, except that they've acknowledged that that communication. The LCRB has never offered, nor has town staff asked about the fit and proper for Happy Buddha.
Okay, so what staff is proposing now is that we would go ahead and consider their application further, but that we would also want confirmation of that fit and proper assessment before submitting our recommendation. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, staff is not proposing anything related to the fit and proper assessment.
Okay.
Councillor Fallon. You're just unmuting there, Councillor Fallon?
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So if I understand this correctly, if we don't respond to the LCRB, then they don't have a positive recommendation and they won't carry on with their process. So if we don't give a positive response. If we direct if we say that we're willing to consider them, that's qualified as a positive, and then the process goes through the process. And once LRC, the Cannabis Licensing Board, goes through their process, then it will come back to Sydney for us to then make that determination. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallett, I would say the first part of that is correct to my understanding, that as the letter indicates from the LCRB, that council can choose not to make a recommendation on this matter. With regard to the second part, option 2 is not a positive recommendation. Option 2 is a resolution by council that council is willing to consider this application further and essentially inviting the applicant to submit a full application as per the town's policy, providing that extra information package that the town requires. This will allow staff and council subsequently to give the application full consideration in light of all the details that they would be providing in that application package as required by policy DV015.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Who would have thought something so simple would be so complex, but it seems to be complex. So we're not approving it, but we're just saying that we will consider it. Option 2. That's option 2 in a nutshell, correct?
That's correct, yes. Not approval. We'd like to consider it further.
Correct. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr.
Any further discussion? I would like to speak for a moment, and I think this is a letter from the LCRB to the town of Sydney, and as been stated previously, there is the sentence, "You may choose to withhold your recommendation until the LCRB has made a final decision regarding the applicant's suitability." And I believe it would be prudent for us to do that. And I don't think we should be requesting an application, information from the applicant and having staff working on that vis-a-vis our cannabis policy, or certainly going to notice to the public to gather views until we hear from the LCRB whether they have passed a suitability assessment. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe if you have, you're speaking for a third or fourth time, and then like to go to Councillor Rintoul for a second time. Sorry, if you'd like to unmute Councillor O'Keefe with your question.
Yep, sorry. No, I think you just answered what I was going to ask in terms of process, that if we did it, agree to option 2, then we would go through the normal process of looking at the application, to go out for views to the public and that sort of thing. So you've addressed that. And I guess I'll just reiterate that I would be more inclined to support a motion that involved responding to the LCRB, that we would consider the application further once the LCRB has completed their assessment of the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a motion at this time, which I think addresses, that aspect that the mayor and some other councillors have spoken to. And so I'll move that staff be directed to respond to the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, indicating the town of Sydney will commence its process to make a recommendation on the application for a cannabis retail store license at 102-9744 3rd Street, Jimmy Retail Corporation, subject to the LCRB completing an applicant suitability assessment and notifying the town that the applicant is suitable.
I would second that.
Further discussion? I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm hoping this might be considered a friendly amendment, but could we add and submission of a complete application to the town?
I would be agreeable to that. I think that's part of the intent, around the town will commence its process. So, yeah, I'm agreeable to that, Councillor Wainwright.
And the seconder?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. Did you wish to continue?
Nope, that's good enough.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have that friendly amendment. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification purposes for me and staff's wisdom, does that altogether sound reasonable and acceptable to you?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, yeah, I think it does. My experience with the LCRB is that their role is to facilitate the approval of cannabis licenses, and generally, if they can do something to move that process forward, they're willing to help. So I think they'll respond to that in a positive way, yes.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And thank you to staff. We'll turn to item 13D, which is the Town of Sydney Council meetings, technical options for review. And we have a report from Mr. Hissick dated October 6th and a number of recommendations. Would you like to introduce this, Mr. Hissick, or do you just want to open it to questions, or Mr. Humble?
I'll speak to it, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of the report is to review how council and committee of the whole meetings are currently being conducted since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, including the potential for having all council members attending each meeting in person, or the majority of council members attending the meeting in person versus some participating electronically. And the report outlines what safety measures would have to be in place in order for this to occur. And the second purpose of the report is to revisit the how the public interacts with council in meetings, including regular public participation, public hearings, special public participation opportunities, as well as presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to thank staff for starting this process of looking at what improvements we can make to ensure not just council can have very fulsome debate and discussion, but also, of course, the public can participate, unhindered in that process. And I say that because I don't know if any of us know what the finish line looks like yet, or where it is, and so we need to be, frankly, taking these steps now to ensure both council and the public have fulsome opportunities to participate in the decision-making process. So thank you for that. I will confess to struggling with the first recommendation. My hope is that we can move these individually to discuss them if we're proceeding with this this evening. With regard to the first recommendation, as it reads, where I struggle with this is that I don't under any circumstance want to see us adopt something that is telling members of council you're required to be in attendance physically. I say that because I don't know what health concerns individuals may have, what susceptibility they may have, even despite the fact there's a piece of plexiglass in between us. And I say that because one of us, all of us, may be exposed at some time to the need to self-isolate. We've seen that throughout our community, and if I have to self-isolate for a couple of weeks waiting test results, I'd like to be able to continue participating during that period, and the manner in which this reads, it doesn't provide that latitude. So my comments would be around, I would like to see a rework, certainly of that first recommendation to respect that element of my concerns. And that frankly, the best way to do that may be to get some feedback and comments this evening and send this back to staff to be revised if there's other areas of concern here in the recommendations. I'll leave my comments there for now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with my colleagues' comments. And with respect to that first motion, I would move that staff be instructed to install plexiglass barriers in the council chambers to allow the full council to be present at a meeting.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
I like the wording of the motion. It says allow, so that it doesn't require people to be in attendance. I guess my initial inclination is to not support it without having more information on what other measures are going to be put in place. Because when the research on this now, the guidance from the health authorities is that it's not just about plexiglass. So you need to look at the size of the room. You need to consider what sort of ventilation there is. It's recommended that you have frequent breaks if you're going to have people talking in the same period of time. How high do they have to be? How broad do they have to be? There's a lot of research about the airborne particles and how they move. So I guess what I'm concerned about is investing in additional costs for plexiglass and giving council members and staff members a false sense of security without this being well researched. So I'm personally not comfortable as coming to council meetings until this pandemic situation is sorted out. We've heard that as the number of cases are rising currently, but regular flu season coming upon us. So to me, the timing doesn't seem right to bringing us all together again. I don't feel that we've been any less productive than we have been in this way. I haven't heard a large outcry from the public that it's important for them to see our faces. But I do recognize that the public hearings can be a bit cumbersome, and we want to make it easier for the public to attend. So I'm more interested in focusing on that aspect in terms of making it easier for the public to attend, and less inclined to spend money on plexiglass and things to allow council members to attend. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think the key word is allow. And so it's going to be up to each individual and their comfort level and how they feel about whatever's devised in here and whether they feel comfortable doing it. And I think there's a certain level of disconnect among some councillors not being in chambers. So I think it's advisable to come up with a method or a means for which those councillors can feel comfortable to come back to chambers or have that opportunity or be allowed to come back and have it be their choice if it can be done in a safe manner. So I'm okay with it as it is amended. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the comments from Councillor O'Keefe and understand them. I, for one, would personally prefer to be back in council chambers and would feel comfortable with plexiglass separation. I think for me, a really big part is setting that one argument aside. The really big part, I think, where the disconnect also happens is for the public. They are seeing 3 members of council on the screen, and they only can hear the rest of us. And I think if there's something that we can do that is workable and doable, that the public sees all of us on the screen. I'm not saying all of us in the chambers, but all of us on the same screen. That would be something that's more important than budgeting for the plexiglass. Budgeting for the plexiglass and enabling some of us to make that reappearance in council chambers is good, but I will put it lower on the priority list than I would allowing the public viewing of the entire council on the screen at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Seeing no other speakers, I'd like to speak for a moment. And I very much feel that, or would very much prefer to have increased connectedness among our council, myself and with colleagues, and colleagues with staff, sitting on 3 CRD boards and 4 CRD committees. In general, we are meeting in full. There are times when individuals cannot attend for health reasons or otherwise, and that's accepted. No questions are asked. But the facility is provided to us for 12-member committees and 24-member board to meet in person, and the protocols have been in place for a number of months now, such that we've been able to meet safely to date. And there are, again, in the periodic mayor conferences that we have, we've talked about this, and some councils are meeting in full. North Saanich has met in full for some time. Of course, they have a larger council chamber than we do, and don't need physical barriers. And there are other councils doing the same in the region. Not a majority, not even half yet. But they do have increased in attendance. So I'm in support of us providing the facility for additional members of council to attend as they wish, or as the motion states, allow members to participate. And I think there would be a benefit to that. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly am inclined to concur with Councillor O'Keefe's comments around other factors that exist in addition to plexiglass, and perhaps it's staff's intent to take into consideration some of those other factors that Councillor O'Keefe referenced, around the ventilation system, et cetera, and the physical distancing aspect in addition to plexiglass. So if you don't mind, through to staff, is the extent of the improvements to chambers that council could expect to be as suggested in the motion that's before us, or is there more to it?
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, staff certainly thought about additional safety protocols associated with having council in greater attendance within the council chambers. We didn't certainly consider looking at the ventilation system. It's not to say we couldn't, but we would need, obviously, there would be a cost associated with any changes that we're looking at undertaking in terms of the ventilation, and I'm not sure if that would be prohibitive or not. In terms of safety protocol, though, certainly aspects, and it's mentioned in the report, establishing some guidelines in terms of how council enters the chamber, as an example, so that we're avoiding, a group entering at once and being in close proximity, so entering one at a time, as an example. The potential, for example, of wearing masks, face masks, when you enter the chambers and exit, again, to ensure a higher level of safety. So those are the things that we've discussed and thought about, and if council proceeds with this, with the resolution to the effect that's identified in the staff report, we can certainly bring forward to council some additional protocols that they might want to consider as part of this.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Follow-up?
Yeah, just in follow-up, if I can, Mr. Mayor. Does having full council back at the front of the room then place limitations on the number of staff who can be in the room at the same time?
It's something that we would want to look at, because when we developed our response plan and the protocols associated with safety within the town hall, we did limit the size of the council chambers to a maximum capacity, and I don't have the figure. Is it 10 persons? So it's something that we may want to look at, and again make a determination in terms of, are some additional safety procedures required with staff in attendance as well. An example being, the potential for plexiglass at this table. Do we look at it in other areas as well? So we would want to take a more fulsome review as part of it anyways.
And, I know council is aware, and members of the public, it was brought up during the EOC reports that, all premises, all organizations that have premises, whether they be a private business, whether they be a nonprofit, whether they be a municipal organization, has to have a WorkSafe BC work plan. And I can tell you that the town of Sydney's is very thick. And when you look around the hall and you look at how protocols have been implemented, plexiglass, hygiene, distancing, and so forth, I think staff have been very thorough, and in addition to what Mr. Humble is or concurring with Mr. Humble in that certainly those things, other things would be looked at as in addition to plexiglass being installed in the chamber. So I'll turn to, we do have a motion on the floor for the first recommendation, and I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I guess what I'm thinking about is the cost of things. And so whether, as I said before, my main concern is being able to make the public more comfortable, to have a less cumbersome process for them to participate. So that's where I prefer to see the money being spent. Less so on council chambers, especially when, while I appreciate, staff talking about other measures such as, having controlled access as we enter and exit council chambers, that's fine. But the highest risk is during the meeting. And so I guess I'd like to see, there's significant information available through the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health. It talks about, there's a lot more to it, as I said, besides the plexiglass. And I guess before committing to anything, I'd like to see that staff have done a bit more investigation into that and have a better understanding of the other risk factors and the things that they have to take into account. Because if it is something like ventilation or other things that have to be considered, that might increase the cost. So is that where we want to put our money, or do we want to put it into having a system that will accommodate the public? Because even if we do this to council chambers, my understanding is we're not going to be inviting the public into council chambers. So it's not going to necessarily do them any good in terms of their ability to participate. So I'm struggling with how to balance those two things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, the cost, I get the sensitivity to the cost, but I think because, you know, we should recognize that we're looking for solutions that are going to be longer term in nature than perhaps any of us would like. And so there are going to be costs associated with this. I tend to think the costs on the technological side could be higher than is perhaps even anticipated in the second recommendation. There's likely a tool out there to address Councillor Fallett's concern about council being, you know, seen and heard during deliberations, you know, from your home offices, for example. And that the installation of plexiglass is only, I think, one very small piece of this puzzle that we need to hear back from staff on with respect to options. So, you know, I like the wording Councillor Wainwright has suggested with allow included there. It gives, you know, council the latitude if they need to self-isolate to continue participating from home, or if they're not comfortable for personal health reasons, it gives them the latitude to make that decision, as it should. But this just seems like a very small piece in the puzzle, and that staff could likely take some of this conversation away and come back with a more fulsome list of suggestions to enhance council chambers, to include staff participation at the numbers in which staff functionally are accustomed and comfortable with. I'm not convinced that there's enough to this motion to go ahead and put plexiglass in and then stand back and wait for the next list of improvements we need to make. So I'm inclined to send this, you know, back to staff and look for something a little more fulsome. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor with regards to plexiglass. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 2 opposed. The motion carries. We have other considerations in the report and in recommendations. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not happy with the second motion. And when I read the staff report, it talks about potential options. It doesn't actually present what the necessary protocols are. And I can say the special public participation period that we held with respect to the Happy Buddha cannabis application, that was really a gong show as far as process. There were a lot of miscues and things that went badly, and I've seen other procedures that did not have the same kind of process issues. So I know that we can do better. So what I would be looking at is asking staff to recommend detailed protocols to allow for public participation and public hearings, and presenters to be given the option to present video. And I'm not hung up on requiring them to do it by phone or any particular technology. The key thing is I actually want to see the detailed protocols before I approve it, because I'd like to be confident it's going to work, or at least be better than what we're currently doing.
Councillor Wainwright.
And
Councillor Wainwright, would you wish to make a referral back to staff on this particular aspect of the recommendations?
well, I could go with a motion that instructs staff to recommend detailed protocols, and I would be okay trying to come up with a motion like that. I guess I'm also okay with just referring the whole thing back to staff.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yes, I'm more inclined to send it back to staff as well. I think that I'd like to see us, I don't know whether we have already analyzed what was going on sort of in the background to lead to the number of issues that we had. It seems to me that there's probably ways to mitigate some of those things, whether it's having a dedicated person that gives a staff person who gives specific instructions to those participating, ensuring that their live streaming is turned off before they participate. I mean, it seems to me that there should be some fairly simple protocols that we could put in place to make sure we don't have the same situation again. So I agree with the idea to send it back to staff and give us some details as to what is the step-by-step process that's going to happen in these situations. And I think it's important to have that well documented so that the person who normally does it, if they happen to be away, that it's easy enough for somebody else to get trained up, to have backup people to look after these sorts of things. So yeah, I'm more inclined to send it back to staff for a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other speakers? Okay, does Council wish to proceed with a motion?
I'll move that we refer this back to staff for a recommendation.
Second.
All those in, further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Before going to the third recommendation, which is with regards to budget amount, it is spoken to. The report speaks to a couple of options with regards to presenting all members of council to the public during council meetings, and I am very much in favor of pursuing an option that does that. Yet we don't have a recommendation before us on that point. I will take it that the last referral was with specifics to procedures for public participation and public hearing. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with you that I think it is important that members of the public can see all of council. That is, members who are participating remotely by video. Because as has been mentioned, if somebody has to self-isolate, or there could be other reasons why somebody can't be in the council chamber and will be participating by video. And I would agree with the mayor. I do think it is important that people be able to see us. And so I would like to see us investigate options for how we can do that. So I'll move that staff be requested to look into options whereby all council members who are participating by remote video can be seen by the public.
Second.
Further discussion, I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
If I may question through to the mover, was the intent as well to provide some budget at this point so the staff have the latitude to move forward with such a technology?
I wasn't looking at doing that. I have no idea what the budget's going to be, and we also don't know what the solution is going to be. So it's I'm reluctant to approve funds for something without knowing what it is.
Okay, so to be clear, we're not really speaking to the third motion. This is something around looking at more options. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think I saw a hand, Councillor Fallett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, I just want to clarify what our bylaw says about members of council coming in remotely. And I know in the past, from last term, we weren't able to come into a meeting electronically. And I realize that we've got the legislation right now because of COVID. Do our bylaws, just remind me, do our bylaws now allow us that if we were in a remote, on vacation, let's say life really does go back to normal, and somebody is on vacation, would that allow us to Zoom into a council meeting while we are away?
Through the mayor, yeah. I think the necessary changes have been made to the council procedures bylaw to address that.
Okay, so, and that's why I think this is an important step for us to take, because this takes us into the future. This is not just right now because of COVID restrictions, but this is addressing the technology we require to be a sustainable council for future years. Thank you.
So,
I'm going to turn back to Mr. Humble.
Sorry, just to correct, I believe it is, temporary until the end of the year for that.
Right, I was
Okay.
going to raise the point if there was a deadline. And I don't think it spoke to all reasons, particularly all reasons for attending remotely. I don't know.
Specific to COVID, I believe, or, I mean, I don't think it outlines it, but I think it is specific to COVID.
I think it is specific to COVID at this point. I think that was the intention of the provincial legislation. I would have to go back to that.
So is this something we can look at to amend our bylaws to allow us to do this?
Yes.
It is something that, that council can consider doing, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I was just looking at staff. Sorry, did we have another speaker? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. So I believe, given the original staff recommendations, that the third, in the report, the third motion was to address the plexiglass barriers and any associated protocols with that. I don't know if staff wish to clarify that, but as has come up with the previous resolution, we are not allocating budget at this time to technology with regards to presenting all council members to the public.
Correct.
Thank you. Does any council member wish to speak to that third recommendation? Okay.
I'll move the recommendation, the $10,000 be approved for the necessary improvements to council chambers and council meeting processes funded from contingency.
Second.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed? We have one opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We have item 13E, which is the monthly building report for September 2020.
I'll move receive for information.
Second.
Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll turn to item 13F, which is the Town of Sydney Strategic Plan for 2021-2022.
I'll move that the Town of Sydney Strategic Plan 2021 through 2022 be approved and disseminated to the community via the town's website, social media outlets, Town Talk, and media relays.
Second.
Discussion? I just want to take this opportunity to thank both council colleagues and staff for the process we undertook to review our strategic plan. Thank you, staff, for the preparations that went into to our meetings, considering the update to the strategic plan. Council had dozens and dozens of outstanding council action items. Those being resolutions that we have passed previously in our term and even from the term previous to that. The report that we received in council with regards to the update on numerous capital projects, some are very significant in the community, as well as other updates. And so my thanks again to colleagues and to staff. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. So we'll turn to the additional item on the agenda, 13G, which is the infrastructure grant application for new washroom facilities in the downtown and downtown waterfront area. We have a report and recommendation.
I move the recommendation that council authorize staff to pursue Community Economic Recovery Infrastructure Program funding for new washroom facilities in the downtown, 4th Street, and downtown waterfront area, and that council authorize staff to direct award the waterfront public washroom preliminary design to Finlayson Bonet Architecture for an upset cost of $3,000.
Second.
Discussion or questions? Councillor Rintoul.
No, just a quick note to thank staff for, I mean, the report certainly notes that there's a lot of work that needs to go into this, hence using the architecture firm to you know, help with the diagrams necessary for this process. But my appreciation to staff for being, you know, on the ready to respond to grant opportunities. And this is exactly what they're doing. It's what we asked for, and it's a project that the town was definitely going to have to move forward with. So my appreciation to staff for being ready to react so quickly. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Council. And we do have the motion. All those in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. I'll now turn to correspondence. We have 4 pieces of correspondence. The first is from the Capital Regional District on the Capital Regional Coastal Flood Inundation Mapping Project. A letter from the Capital Regional District dated September 23rd.
I'll move we refer to staff for a report.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. And then we have item 14B, which is also from the Capital Region CRD regarding the Capital Region Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory Study, and a letter from the CRD dated September 23rd.
I'll move receipt for information.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. And we'll turn to the third correspondence, which is COVID Readiness Project, an email from Steve Duck, President of Cycling Without Age, and a request dated September 24th.
I'll move that we provide a letter of support.
Second.
Discussion? I just thank Mr. Duck for bringing this forward. Cycling Without Age is being missed in our community, and any protocols, COVID protocols that they can implement to see that up and running again would certainly be appreciated in the community. I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. And we'll turn to the additional item on our agenda, 14D, which is the Memorial Park Society request for a letter of support for the Parkland Track 21 replacement campaign.
I'll move that the town provide a letter of support for the Track 21 replacement grant opportunity.
Second.
Discussion or questions from staff? I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just note that the Memorial Park Society certainly have been working with School District 63 with respect to making improvements to the track facility that's there for a number of years, may not be an exaggeration to say over a decade. And so certainly at the MPS level, they've supported working with ST63 on this in cooperation. The board, MPS board was presented with this and fully supportive of the undertaking. Obviously, it was initially felt that letters of support may not be required, but that has obviously changed with the addition of this late item. And so happy to see Sydney write a letter noting that it's been pointed out here that there's no request for funding at this time, and that there won't be such requests coming forward. So I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rintoul. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? And none opposed, and that motion carries. Thank you. We now have correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. We have no notices of motion or motion to go on camera. I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for this evening. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.